Welcome to Your Data Journey, uncovering your path to data success.
Our moderator today is Joe Colangelo, CEO and co-founder of Bear Analytics, and I love Bear Analytics and have for a number of years. So Joe is the co-founder and CEO. Bear Analytics is a technology company that powers event success. Joe is obsessed with the fundamental belief that data-driven insights make for better event outcomes and experiences. And as a planner, we need him on our side, right? It was that foundational belief that led to the creation of Bear IQ, the industry-leading event analytics platform that powers the measurement, design, and growth of the world's best experiences. Joe?
Thank you very much. Really excited to be here, everyone. More excited to be joined by my partner in crime today, Ace Miller. We're going to be getting boost last 4 to 5 next 5 minutes, I think. So we're going to talk really. We're going to focus on Ace and journey for NH. I'm going to give her a second to herself. Second. And the goal of the session is to walk through not just that, but also the tips and tricks that her team have employed along the way outside success. This coming in and out, how's that? Better? Okay. Gonna start yelling, get my Italian up. Okay. All right, with that, Ace, please introduce yourself and yell into the microphone.
Okay. I'm Denise Miller. I'm with the National Association of Home Builders, and we produce International Builders Show. So the show's been around for 8 years. We are 80th year in 2024, and we're the largest annual light construction show in the world. So great show, wonderful to work on. We do have some other team members. Jen Sloan is in the front row. She and I work together day by day with a lot of the stuff. And we had our last pre-pandemic show here in Vegas in 2020. The great show. Should I go ahead with what happened next?
Yeah, why don't you keep going? Oh, this is on now, right? We're good? All right, two mics. Go.
Okay. So 2020, great show in Vegas. Everything was amazing. And Sean, my colleague, who's also in the audience, turquoise shirt, he was mentioning about something that was happening in China. I can vividly remember him in the little exhibitor sales lounge, like I have no idea what you're talking about. And then very quickly after that, everybody remembers everything closed down. Our 2021 show was a virtual show. You might have heard about it. The exhibitor side of it crashed and burned. It was really, really. Then we got to our 2022 show. 2022 happened in Orlando. It was a great comeback. Nice show. Then we had 23, which we held here just in this past January, and it was our best show since the 2008 show from an attendee side. And I firmly believe that a lot of that was just sticking with our data journey, not getting derailed, thinking we had to do something completely different, but just working those things that had always worked for us. And I look forward to talking about that a little.
So that's a great segue. So let's dig down deep into it. So we're peeling back the layers on the strategy that Denise and her team have employed in kind of this 3-pronged approach of, strategy, analytics, and personalization. Because, I'm not going to put the words in your mouth. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about how you kind of think about each of those 3, and then how you bring them together to mobilize a team for success.
Sure. So we started working with Bear in 2016. And it was very basic. It really came back to not understanding exactly how we were achieving success. So on a weekly basis, and I'm sure like most of you, everything is weeks out from the show. So we would be 24 weeks out from the show. Then I'd look at a report from 23 weeks out. And you could see registration had grown, but to try and determine what had actually happened would involve lots of paper, lots of scratching this down and scratching that down, right? And we finally got to a point where it was like, we have to find a better way to understand what's actually happening with our registration. through a mutual colleague, we found Bear Analytics. And so when we started very basic. We literally wanted to understand what worked a week prior. And just that alone, and Joe and I have talked about this many times, like there's no new numbers that were developed. I mean, this is all information that was there. We just didn't have a way to quickly synthesize it and tell us what was actually working. So from 2016 to 2023, things look much different. But we know as marketers and anybody who markets the show and just as humans, what speaks to you is the personalization of why this event is important to you. So being able to look at these individual groups of segments and know, okay, this thing that we just did really resonated with this group, that allowed us a flexibility that we didn't have in years past.
Well, can I ask a question about that personalization piece?
Sure.
Because I think it would help the group to understand with a show this size, it's not like there's just one audience. And so how many, generally broad strokes, how many groups are you trying to cater to, trying to motivate to attend? And then we'll get into kind of the other side of the aisle and the exhibitor side in a second.
Sure. So for our show, it's an association show. So we have a large membership. We have about 140,000 members. And our show is made up of about 50,000 members, or 50% members, 50% non-members. So we have members, non-members, and then specific to our industry, the exhibitors want to see dealers and distributors. And the way I can explain that is they love seeing a custom builder, right? It's wonderful to meet a person that wants to buy a lot of things for 3 or 4 or 5 homes they might be building. But to meet a dealer or distributor that instead of buying 5 high-end fridges, they might be buying 500 or 1,000 or 2,000. For our exhibitors, that's really the sweet spot. So for us, we have 3 core audiences of members, non-members, and dealers and distributors. And obviously those dealers, distributors fall into those member and non-member buckets. Then aside from that, there are a lot of ancillary groups, sales and marketing people, architects. So we are always slicing and dicing the data in a lot of different ways. And again, this is all stuff we could have done prior, but it's a lot of man hours. And now it's literally a click of a button. You can see how many people are in a specific group.
So that's a good segue. Let's talk about now kind of the other things too that go along and you put into play to facilitate, reduce kind of the more manual components of it. And so as we look here kind of at the visual, setting goals, starting with some of the project management and tool sets that have been put into practice. What does that look like? How have you mobilized the team around adopting new tools that they haven't before?
So again, this is all evolved 2016 to 2020. But for us, there are a lot of tools that lead up to being able to use data effectively. Not just the Bear portion of it. It's getting all the ducks in a row so that when we get to the point that registration is open, we're able to act on things. And what that looks like for us, we have a really, really detailed project management system. We use Smartsheet. We like to say that nothing happens unless it's on a Smartsheet somewhere. I won't say it hasn't been painful. I keep looking at Jen because she's kind of like the keeper of the sheets. And it is a huge change to go from being just, I'm going to put together a production schedule and we're going to email it out. Everybody's going to work off this email. I mean, now everything is in Smartsheet. So we build reports that will tell you this is what Joe has for the next 30 days, what the designer has for the next 30 days. In addition, we do a lot of work just to set the stage, right? Get everything ready so that when registration opens. And what that means is, for example, with our photography, when all the photography comes in from the show, we spend a ton of time going through that photography, tagging that photography. So we know that if we're going to market to those dealers and distributors, and we're going to talk about something happening on the floor, we have a little light box that's created just for dealers and distributors. Within that light box, everything is tagged for a certain part of that dealer distributor audience. And again, it's kind of like, I think of it kind of like sports. Like our summers are spent in the weight room, right? Getting all these pieces ready so that when the game starts, start going through the Bear the Bear weekly reports, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later, we're already ready. Like if it's like this audience is really ready to go with this topic that we're talking about, we have all the pieces ready to go. So the summers are spent just laying that foundation that we have everything. Everything is kind of just waiting for us to pull the trigger on it.
And so as someone kind of looking in from the outside and who talks to a number of event organizers to kind of sit in Denise and her team's kind of role, this measure twice, cut once exercise, I think is really useful because there's a deliberateness to her planning. And we're going to talk in a second about how sometimes the plan goes out the window, but there's a plan for that, which is interesting, and leading into being uncomfortable. But let's talk about from the project management standpoint. Now, you said, I love that summers are in the weight room piece. And then when it comes to the activation. So now we're starting to start the first curve on the agility side. Talk a little bit about what it looks like in the fall of the upcoming event year. We're rounding the corner on September, October, Reg is opened, and now the team's in it.
Yeah, so toward late September or late summer, we're putting together the week-by-week plan. So what is different than traditional marketing? I mean, I'm old enough, right, that I've done a ton of traditional marketing. We just hired a new person who was like, let me see the marketing plan for last year. There really is no giant marketing, which makes some people really uncomfortable. But I think to have a giant marketing plan, I mean, you're not actually playing in the environment we're in now. It makes no sense. Like you had a giant marketing plan before because you didn't have all this constant information coming in. So what that looks like for us is when we get to September, again, a weeks out standpoint, we know that something will be happening right? We know we'll have paid media that's going at a certain time. We'll have deadline-oriented things that are happening at a certain time. But then there's also a ton of flexibility within that plan. So it might be that week 20, 16, 15, 14, we're going to send an email. The people who deploy email know I'm going to have an email that week. The designer knows I'm going to be designing a header that week. And the copywriter knows I'm going to be putting together an email that week, but we don't know what that email is going to be about. And so just being able to respond to what we're learning, and again, having all of the class, as Jen would call it, ready, just sitting there waiting, right? The copywriter's written all about this topic. We're just waiting for the right time to fire that information out. It allows us to quickly pull everything together and get it out. And so from the standpoint of Bear, for us, Tuesdays are our weeks out. Our show starts on a Tuesday. So every Tuesday is kind of like that day of reckoning. Like, where are we? Tuesday can end Tuesday morning at 6:30. We're either having a really good day or we're, having a really bad day. But we spend that day, we go through the numbers, we talk to Bear, we look at our Bear IQ. Is that what we call it? Bear IQ? That's what we call it now. Bear IQ. And from that, Jen and I will determine, okay, the dealers and distributors, they look really solid. Like, we don't need to worry about the dealers and distributors. But education has really dropped off. In the last week, no one's replying to the education that we're putting down, right? So then we'll talk to the copywriter and say, okay, what do we already have banked or what do we know is coming up that would really get people to move the needle? So it really is just being, you said it earlier, like comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I really feel like it's not even uncomfortable now for us because we've done it so long. It makes me really more uncomfortable to think about just a set plan. You're not taking any new data in and you're just hoping it works, right? Because each week we can kind of see what is working and what isn't. Something's not working, immediately we abandon. We don't just say, let's send it 3 more times, see if it'll work. They've already told you it doesn't work. Time to move on to something else. Yeah.
No, that's great. So you're basically getting into the next piece here. So, because I think for a lot of times with folks, they go, okay, how do I kind of get started? How do we get moving on this? It feels like, and like you said, it's an evolution. This isn't like we woke up last week and we're like, here's the new game plan. There is no game plan. Throw it out the window. Jen's still working for you, right? So that's good. People aren't like pulling out their hair, right? So how did we get here? And you mentioned, you alluded to like the Tuesday, meetings, but I think let's spend a little time unpacking what we got up here is dedicated space, but what do we call it? Marketing meditation, right? So it's literally the pause, the reset to understand what comes forward. And so what does that look like across the team? And then how do you mobilize that in a way where you're like, okay, Wednesday's going to be good because we did the work on Tuesday? To just let the group in a little bit about how that looks.
So with our team, we only have 2 people that are really dedicated to marketing the show. We have a larger team, but our entire team markets everything that the National Association Home Builders does. So membership, smaller events, all kinds of things. We have 2 people that are really focused on the show most of the time. So for us, into Tuesday again, Jen and I do a whole exercise outside of what we do with Bear for the leadership of our association to really compare where we are in the current year to past years. So for example, last year, being back in Vegas, we didn't compare it. We compared it slightly to Orlando, but we really looked at the last time we were in Vegas. Put together a lot of numbers around that. And then in the afternoon, with our beer person. Now, there are times where like that is the last thing I want to do. I'm just like, I don't have the bandwidth for it. We kind of go into it probably not in the right headspace. And every time as you talk through what's happening or not happening, it's kind of seriously like this calmness, right? The whole waking up in the middle of the night, should I have made more postcards? Should I have done this? Like that pretty much goes away because you spend the time to look at where things are. And I think for most of us, that element of feeling like you have some control over something just helps the whole process going forward. So as we talk to Bear, we talk about very specific things. Like somebody might point out, hey, I don't know what you did here, but this really worked. So we'll look at what did we do in the last week? What email went out? Jen will, in real time, pull up the stats on that email. Or we'll look at something like recently for this last show, there was a group that we weren't really getting to come in. And so we're like, okay, let's try and do a postcard. So Jen, we have something called the Audience Bureau, which is part of Bear. We could go in and look at how many people didn't attend the last show, but have attended a previous show in Vegas, go through all this maturation, end up with that number of people. I can pull the contacts from the audience viewer immediately, have these people that seem like they would be a good group. So we talked about doing this postcard. Jen looks up the numbers. Numbers are really small. Immediately abandon that idea. That's not like we get 1 to 2% of that. That's nothing, right? So I think it's that immediate feeling of not like by the end of that 30 minutes, we have a plan. Now it could be that the plan didn't work, but we leave that and Jen will go then communicate with her team. I'll go communicate with Ryder. We're all on the same page. It gets slotted into the project management system. So email week 14 will be replaced with email. It might be the email is going to go to dealers and distributors. We're going to highlight all the new exhibitors that are going to be there. But we walk out of that meeting with some plan as to what's going forward. Now, again, I think there are people that the idea of that is just like panic-inducing. But I think in the end, what you'd find if you're looking at it is you actually have so much control over what you want to do with this group instead of just, it's week 14. We said we were going to go after X, right? It's just getting there. And again, year 7 for us, right? So this isn't what we used to do. It used to be, and I told Jen and I were talking yesterday, I can remember the first time I used this portal. And we were at a meeting with our members, and our chair wanted to know how many people are registered from Nebraska, right? And I mean, that's the kind of question we have. And what that would have meant before is me like frantically emailing Jen, and Jen looking through the report where she could find the merits geography reporting back, 47 people. And the next question would be, how many people attended from last year? Then I would have texted Jen. And Jen would have looked at the final report and she would have texted back. But now with the portal, you can go in and I was like, 32 people. How many people attended last year? Right there, it was 47 people. How many people, then there's another guy. Well, tell me how many people are in Iowa. So I think like just having that ability to know so much about your attendees or potential attendees, the confidence that builds with your leadership, the confidence that builds with your members. Now they'll ask about things that clearly there's no report for, but they're so used to there being a report for something, they'll be like, is that something Bear could do for us? That really has nothing to do with what it does, but yeah, we'll ask.
So the data, you hinted at something at the end there that I think is really important, is the leaning in on the data transparency side across multiple stakeholders. So we covered kind of how you share it across the team and use it internally, and a couple of examples on board members and stakeholders that are coming up. What about through the exhibitor lens and using that to kind of help support some of those initiatives? Because obviously like you said, coming back after the pandemic, it's really critical for those stakeholders to understand, well, what is IBS going to look like for us for our first time back in Vegas or our first time back in Orlando?
Yeah, so it was extremely helpful for us with the 22 show. So again, the 21 virtual show, say it was not great would be an understatement, right? It was really one of my worst professional experiences ever. Everybody worked really hard. Things just did not come together. And you had a lot of exhibitors that, they're great, have long-standing exhibitors. They stuck through it with us. They understood what happened. But going into 22, everyone was nervous. We were going back to Orlando. Traditionally, Vegas is the stronger show for us than Orlando. And in 22, having this information, I think really, I don't want to be over dramatic, but I'm in marketing, so of course I'm kind of dramatic. It really saved us. So how that looked for us is we did a ton of exhibitor webinars. And the whole point of the webinar was to allow exhibitors to ask questions, but then for us to also tell them about the people they were going to see at the show. And through this portal, the Bear IQ, we would really drill into okay, you're going to see the same percentage of dealers and distributors. They really didn't care about the raw number. They cared about, are the people that we want to see going to be there? So we would talk a lot about the number of homes that were started by the attendees that we thought were coming. We would talk about the fact that not only did they buy a registration, but they also are buying the special event ticket. So we're sure that they're coming, they're spending multiple days. And we did at least 3, maybe 4 webinars where the whole point of the webinar was just like, let's all calm, let's be calm, it's gonna work, it's gonna be great. And I think it was good for them to hear it, and I think it was also good for us to know we're gonna put on a great show, people are gonna show up and they're gonna have a great time. We also use this to talk a lot to our CFO. So again, for us, using this tool is not a significant amount of money within our budget, but she absolutely sees the value in it. And so we always include her if we're going to do a presentation about something. Our leadership was invited to be part of these webinars, but I think making sure that people understand how this is valuable for us. And I've literally said, if I ever move to another association, if there isn't this kind of tool or this specific tool, I do not want to do this job. I cannot imagine going back in marketing and just kind of hoping it's working, right? It's just that different once you start using it.
No, I appreciate that, Denise. So let's get into, I think one thing we hear all the time is, what are the metrics that folks are interested in or see move the needle? Because in the team environment and the agile environment that you've put together, there are specific ways that you look at metrics, the ones that you hang your hat on more than others. And I'm happy to help, be the second set of support on this. But what are your perspective on it?
Well, at the end of the day, it's all registrations for us, but I think understanding where those registrations are coming from. So for us, a huge goal for 24 is taking all of our first timers from 23 and converting them to be sophomores. And that is something we look at every year. Now it's a little bit.
That's just a really good piece of advice. If your first timer to sophomore ratio grows, your likelihood of your event outseating the week before goes up by like double-digit percentages. The more you know.
And that's the perfect example of something like that's obvious, right? Of course, you want your first timers to come back, but I think understanding like what's also been helpful for us is I don't know if that number should be 40% or 10%, right? Like I don't know what the normal show does, and we are involved in the community. We have a lot of show friends that we talk to, but what's been helpful is knowing for Bear, like the guidance they gave us is that should grow 13 to 26%, right? If you're in that 13 to 26%, I think is right.
Yeah, it's close. Yeah, that's right.
Then you're meeting what the average is for shows converting their first-time attendees, sophomores, or second-time attendees. For us, it's a little bit different because our show was rotating between Vegas and Orlando. So last year, we were in Vegas after not being there since 2020. And so we really didn't even look at that number. I mean, we did look at the number, but there wasn't there wasn't a huge amount of pressure on us if we didn't see that number fit within that scope, right? Because we know that Florida is more of a regional show, although it wasn't last time we were there. Anyway, so a big goal for us in 2024 is seeing that percentage grow. So we will monitor that like from week one. We're going to be very focused on that number. Another thing that is important for us is just getting new companies in. And how that impacted us since last year is we do a lot of work with MDG, and they help us just find people, right? So like in the old days, and by old days, I mean like 2 years ago, we would buy a mail list, and we would just go out to some people that we thought might be interested in what we're doing. And this year when we started we opened registration, I mean, we were getting people we had never seen before. Like our overall list, we have about 500,000, a little more than 500,000 people that we've put into our audience viewer within Bear IQ. So there's 500,000 people that in some way we've touched, we know, so they might be a member, they might have bought a different product and service from us, past attendees, but that's kind of like our core audience, right? Then as we're meeting with Bear, they're like, where are you getting all these? Like, we've never seen these people before. They're not even in your system. So what we were realizing is the work we were doing with MDG, we were pulling in all these people top of funnel that they're finding them for us, right? So they do a lot of social work for us. They do some Google Analytics work for us. And because those numbers kept coming in strong, what we would have normally spent with direct mail, and I mean, it was a week-by-week thing where I'd say to Jen, like, should we send postcards? Do we need some more postcards? And I don't think so. I think we're doing good. So we just kept monitoring that. It kept coming in really strong. And really, we decided maybe we don't need to spend some of this postage. Like, the likelihood that they're going to respond to this postcard, again, you get 1 to 2%. And that's it. It's a one and done, right? They get that postcard. They don't look at that postcard. They throw that postcard away. I don't have a way to touch them again. They're not in this database. So this year we spent about a third of the postage we would normally spend, which for Sean, who managed the budget, he's like, what is happening? Like, well, we're going to try this, right? And then we could use that money on something else. And again, with that postage money, the money we spent with MDG was about a fourth of what we would have normally spent on postage. So again, just being able to look at like, in the years before, it'd be like, yay, registration's up, but I don't really know how or why, right? Now you really know, like, it's up because of this thing. This is how we're getting these people, which then allows you to look at your budget and think, is there a better way to spend this money that I would have used? And so for 2024, we're going to see, does that happen again? Like, did it just happen because we were in Vegas? Or is it going to be a repeat thing? If it's a repeat thing, then we'll change how we're doing things forward. But that isn't something we would have been able to know prior to.
So I just want to unpack one thing that you mentioned there on the first timers piece, because another kind of key metric that we looked at through the campaign was organizational depth. And so what we mean by that is unique individuals per company. And because there's been so much turnover in really all industries, right, over the last 2 to 3 years for headcount, and for a couple of years, there wasn't really a good top of funnel exercise. You're going through that 500,000 folks and you're like, who's actually real and who's not? And so one of the things that we wanted to keep a tight look at is truly looking at, are we seeing more individuals per company register? And early in the campaign, immediately that was kind of the first thing that jumped out, is that the companies that were coming back in a more than material way. And so we felt pretty good about where the content and the messaging and the alignment was to those folks who, the individuals themselves may never have experienced the event, but their organization had some kind of historical context there. And so the value proposition and the branding, and we knew that was on target. And we saw that all the way through to the campaign, to the point where we're like, no, this is going to drop at some point, right? It's just, it's too strong. It's too strong. But it held up quite a bit all the way through the goal line. And so that's another thing that, frankly, across the board, that organizational depth metric is a highly sensitive one for those that are looking to calculate something for their own shows. I highly recommend that right now for your upcoming event.
And to kind of follow up on that, so a year that was not as positive as that was great this year. But a few years ago, and I think it was probably in 2020, even though that was a fantastic show for us, we have an Expo Pass, and we also have an Expo Plus Education Pass. So the person who has oversight of that education arm came to us and said, why aren't the education registrations coming in, right? So registration was strong, but really we make money off of the the Expo Plus Education Pass. And we were kind of like, I don't know, right? So we went to Bear again. We looked at the companies being represented. Companies looked good, but the number of people per company was down. And so when we could drill into that, what we were finding is that extra person, or it was a percentage of, but that was the person that was going for education, right? So we went back to them and said, here's what we're finding. This overall person per company number is down, and because of that, we think that's what's happening. So then we did a campaign very specific about, here's why somebody in your company should be attending the education. And I mean, in the end, we were fine, we ended up getting more, but it was just the fact of being able to understand when that number was up, that was part of that number, was that education pass person.
All right, we got a couple of questions, so let's talk about tips and tricks first. And I think you kind of touched on all of these, but number one, being uncomfortable saying no. What does that look like from a leadership standpoint? The concept of doing less kind of is counterintuitive to we're trying to gain more.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't usually talk about the fact that we don't have a complete marketing plan because, again, I don't think most people would understand it. But I do think because we've done this for a few years now, people are very comfortable with the answer that when you look at the Bear data, that doesn't make sense, right? Because it's performed for us so well over the years, that now can be the answer for no. Now, there are tons of things we do that we don't want to do because of another reason. But if someone offers something up and we go through and we're like, when we look at the audience, it's really small, or when we look at the audience, they don't usually do this, then there is a very valid reason for saying no.
You want to talk top of funnel next? We covered it a little bit. Yeah,
we covered it a little bit. So again, I think for us, knowing that some of the tactics that we would have used in the past, it seems very obvious now, but that used to be the way you did it, right? You just bought a list, sent it out, and hoped for the best. And now being able to track that this person isn't within our universe and really build that top of funnel, it allows us then spend time going into that universe and pulling out people that are really good candidates for the show. So maybe you attended 2 years ago and you haven't been back. Well, let's talk to you. Let's meet you where you are and tell you why you want to go to Vegas, which is a much better use of time than printing, and mailing a postcard to a bunch of people that you're not sure if they're even interested in. But we used to do that all day long.
All right, we got a couple of questions. We're going to...
You choose a great beer in the middle with their membership and more. It's like
question.
Great question. So I can handle part of the technical on that. Yeah, on the registration side, that's how we get the up to the minute everything. So absolutely super tight integration with Merits, formerly Experian. Been working with them for a number of years now. That's really super solid. On the membership front, I think we have kind of like more of a loose integration. We pull the data down from the EMS because we don't want to be integrating back and accidentally overwrite anything. But the data that Denise, Jen, and some of the team then support back into email is effectively that registration or membership data that they then upload back into their email platform. We do some enriching and cleaning of the data so that there's new flags and tags and some nice bells and whistles that they can use from a tagging standpoint. But yeah, it's all pretty seamlessly integrated at this point.
Is there anyone other question?
I do have a question if you guys don't have any question. I'm just curious if any of you are doing a similar thing, or if there's something where you're like, yeah, we do all that and we do this, right? Because we're always looking for the next thing that we should be doing. So is there anything?
New and cool? That's what you're asking for?
Yeah,
New and
yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Like a describe. We tried it in age and the top person that but wasn't.
Yeah, good point. So everything we've been talking about has kind of been leading into the event, but then obviously, like, guess what? Like, an event happens, spoiler alert, and the whole goal is if we get the right people to the right location with the right mix of exhibitors, then that should be the serendipitous magic. And what Sean's referring to there is that, of course, there's a tremendous amount of, on-site tracking, leads, the connections, the stuff that we're hoping to do kind of later today out of this session. And that volume of data, we're also loading back in for a couple of, meaningful end applications. One being, of course, showcasing exhibitor ROI. So letting exhibitors know year over year, here's what your trajectory looks like. But then so one of the things about the NHB team is like they're ruthlessly innovative to the point where they're always trying to figure out a better way to create the on-site engagement that maximizes the value for their event. And so, this year we're doing a new initiative, which is really going to be looking at combination of kind of like density and then flows where people are going, because this was the first year that the West Hall was used, brand spanking new, kind of clean, spit polish that up. And so they moved their show from a physical dimensionality standpoint. They want to know what that looks like from the attendee experience, and then where are people voting, kind of with their feet. And so there's, 2 or 3 prongs that we're getting into, and that work's being, conducted right now. So it's kind of like the end result, more the ROI component, not just kind of leading into the event.
Yeah, and with that example, so again, with the 23 show, we put all of our education and what we call our centrals, which is like niche networking, all in the West Hall. So we want to see the people who went to education, the people who bought an Expo plus education pass, did they ever make it anywhere else, right? And part of that, I think, is just to see the traffic to help understand how that impacts exhibitors. But it also will help us when we're messaging those folks, because if they really don't care that much about the exhibitors, then we won't talk about the exhibitors as much. Or if we see that, for the most part, they spent day 1 in education, day 2, they went over to the exhibits, day 3, they were back in education. It helps us, one, plan for what those spaces are like, and also talk to them about the full value of the show. So that was like a special project that we started this year, knowing that putting everything in the West Hall, what does that mean for us? Because usually our education is spread out over the entire campus.
And I mean, the interesting thing there is there's like, that's a new thing, but there's no net new data collection. Like, there wasn't a new platform instituted. These leads have been being collected historically year over year. It's literally just taking that data asset and pivoting it into a more useful way, learning from it, and then doing more kind of cool stuff after that. So we're taking the potential energy of the data, if you want to look at it from a physics standpoint, and turning it into kinetic energy, right? And so We're excited and optimistic about what we're going to be, maybe talking about on this stage next year at this time in terms of like the learnings and the findings. But I think the overall tone is you're probably collecting more useful information than you ever have through the various platforms at your event. The question just becomes, what kind of activation are you going to have on it?
Yeah, I don't think when we started with beer, I'm not sure there's any additional stuff we do collect. It was just a matter of pulling it all and getting it to them and getting it all clean, right? But it's not, the lift really isn't on adding a bunch of extra things. It's being able to look at the data quickly and make decisions based on it, not get to the end of the year and then try and see what did the year teach you, because by then you've moved on to the next year, right? And especially now with post-pandemic, I mean, remember we were looking at every digital platform out there and everybody was going to have a hybrid show. And I mean, we've gone through 4 lifetimes of what a trade show would be. So being able to respond in real time instead of, 2 months later after your show's over, I mean, changed again. So, I mean, if I had any advice, it would definitely be just start small. One of the things that Bear at the very beginning asked us is, what do you really need to know? And Sean is guilty of this too. I mean, we come up with 47 questions, right? And they're like, no, what do you really need to know? And come up with those 3 or 4 things that when you're sitting there thinking, should I do more? If you just knew the answer to that, that would solve that question. And do that the first year. And then get all your systems in place, which again is no small feat, right? It's a different way of working. I think it's a really exciting way of working. I think it makes it really fun. It seems more like on a weekly basis, are you getting closer to this goal? It has less of a slog feel to it, and more every week is a new week, what you can do and how you can move that needle. And at least for me, I mean, I've been doing this for 20 some years. I love working this way. It's just, it's completely different than putting something together and just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. It's every week you can change the direction of what you're doing because you have all the information there that can help you make a really valid decision. So even if you just start small and every year just kind of add additional things to it, if you have special projects like we just did with how is this location working, or we're working hard on showing exhibitors the value of being in the show, segmenting the show. So I'm sure there'll be some analytics around that. But it's just a different way of working. And I think it really carries over to other things you look at where it may not in any way be related to the normal stuff you do with the show, but just looking at things through that prism, having data-informed decisions, that's now how we work. You often hear people is there any data on this? And you're like, no, it's not a data thing, right? But that we all have that mindset now. And that's, refreshing rather than somebody's gut feeling about something that may or may not be right.
So we got a little under a minute left. Any additional questions? All right. If not, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thanks to the ETL team. Thank you, Denise Miller.
It was really fun.